Hey everybody, we are teaching Tilt Brush, and this time we're going to be raising mountains in Tilt Brush. And they could be used for a couple of different things actually, so we're really going to focus on two types of mountains. Background mountains, like the hills we have here, but I want mountains, not hills. So we're going to be making background mountains. Those are going to be kept simple, both for processor time on things like Quest, and also so it doesn't distract from the focus of your art. It's there as a background to give you the feeling and environment without drawing too much attention. We're also going to make an actual mountain as the main production itself. So we're going to do some details and look at some tools that'll help a mountain really feel like it's got weight and mass and size. But to start with, we're going to start in the background. So I'm actually going to change our scale and move us into the back. And we're going to do some mountains back here. You can see we've got our ground down there. We're going to giant dinosaur size. Now, for mountains, the easiest tool to start with is indeed the hull tools, because the hull tools are how we can build up these shapes. And I can make a bunch of shapes going in the background to act as mountains. You can see how the different types of hull you choose. The standard matte hull gives us plenty of highlight and shadow. The shiny hull is a little more glossy. This will be especially useful if we want to do things like a snow cap or glossy mountains in the rain or at night. The unlit hull. This is nice because we can have several pieces coming out of it, and you'll never see a seam. You'll never see a line that shows that they're separate pieces. The disadvantage, of course, there's no highlight or shadow. Finally, we have our diamond hull, but because that's transparent, we're probably not going to make mountains out of it at this time. So I'm going to clear this all out, and we're going to put some mountains in the background. Now, background mountains, we don't need a lot of detail, but we really are looking for that shape, that silhouette against the sky. So I'm going to leave my sky at gray, and we're going to make mountains. Now, with color and light, darker, bluer, purpler colors will fade into the background. So I'm actually going to go for a dark purple to start with, and I'm just going to grab the flat unlit hull. Since I want this to be way in the background, these are just going to be silhouettes, so I don't need highlight and shadow. If I did want the viewer to approach them more, then using a matte hull with highlight and shadow will give them a little bit of depth. But in this case, I'm going for straight flat color. That also means, since this is a background object, I don't need to worry about depth. I don't need to worry about layers as much. These mountains could be pretty much just sort of cardboard cutouts that sit behind everything. So that silhouette, that shape, now becomes a ridgeline in the background. So I'm going to do this with a much darker, almost black purple, and I'm just going to give myself a bunch of shapes on the horizon. Depending on the mountains, if you're going for jagged mountains, rocky mountains, Himalayas, that type of thing, then you can see how keeping it to a point is going to give you that jagged feeling. If I'm going more for Appalachians, Adirondacks, maybe the older Pyrenees, then more of a rounder hilltop will give you more of that type of effect. What is the silhouette you're looking for, and how can we add those elements with just quick strokes? Now you'll notice I'm not doing a lot of detail, which means on the slower systems like a Quest or a PlayStation, I could get a whole horizon without using a lot of processing power. Since this is just meant to be background, I don't want to spend a lot of my resources on a lot of details that most people aren't even going to look at. So I'm going to get a few little mountain shapes in here, jaggeds, so that you can see how that looks as the background. So I've got a feeling of a mountain range. I could clean it up over there a little bit, but now I've got a bit of a feeling of a mountain range that helps give my setting a little bit more feeling, a little bit more location. Now, with the matte brush or any of the hull tools, bear in mind, it's a single point. If I try doing a double point, you can see how it's going to connect the two peaks. I can't have that dip. I actually need to make them as two separate peaks if I want to keep them as different objects. So I'm going to go back into my mountain range back here. And we're going to close off the bottom of these so we don't have that big gap over here. There we go. We're going to try to keep all the bottoms more or less in line, hiding any holes and gaps. But we can now keep this mountain range going in the background, adding more peaks and twists and cliffs and things, keeping it going around in a big circle all the way around my project. So that anywhere you look, we have this much steeper, more jagged mountain range as the backdrop. So I did this all in dark purple. If I do want to have layers, if I do want to have parallax, I can go a little bit closer, and I'm going to make this one just a little bit more blue and a slight bit paler, so that I can add more details, more mountains and foothills. And the color itself helps it stand out a little bit, gives it a little bit of plain, a little bit of depth. In this case, they're almost too close together, so I'm going to give it a little bit paler and recolor and get these pieces into a little bit brighter purple so that when we see them in the background, they stand out just a little bit more. That's a little easier to see. Do whatever's appropriate for your environment. So if I wanted to do a desert scene, I could use dark browns and reds. If I'm doing tall peaks in the distance, purple mountain's majesty is a phrase because purples and blues tend to fade into the distance. So I've got these set up as my background mountain range. Let's get a few more mountains back here. In my foreground mountains, a little bit lower, but I'm also going to make them a little bit more peaky, add a couple multiple peaks, that type of things. Again, try to keep the bottom fairly straight so there aren't too many holes and gaps in my horizon line. Now I've got some mountains happening in the background. If you really want to make them blend in, here's where we can bring up the fog as well. You can see bringing up the fog converts them into a pure silhouette. And you can really play with the distances to see how far, how dark you can get. I'm going to even make my fog a darker color so they really go silhouette against that skyline. So you can see how fog is going to blend those into the background so we see the silhouette, if not the actual colors involved. Thank you. So now that we've got mountains as a background set up, let's look at doing an actual mountain in detail rather than just a silhouette, rather than just a shape. I'm going to build up a mountain here. So let's get my floor up here so I can make it very mountain-like. Now, there's going to be lots of debate between different types, whether you've got crustal upheavals or volcanic mountains or whatever you're trying to do. Get a general idea of what you're playing with. Don't feel like you are restricted to exactly that. Let the paintbrush develop its own tricks. See what details happen as you go. The more you get fixed in trying to do it a specific way, the more likely you'll feel like you did something wrong. And when it comes to drawing and painting like this, there is no wrong. It's just a little different. And how can you take advantage of those differences? So I'm going to have a gentle peak here going up to a rocky snow-capped mountain. I'm actually going to start at the top. Let's change my scale a little bit here. And I'm going to switch to my shiny hull so that my pure white snow will have nice shadows, highlight, and reflections. Now, just like before, one stroke will give you a single peak. That peak isn't necessarily pointed on the top, but you can't do multiple peaks in one stroke. So if I want that multiple peak type of shape, I am going to have to build it up out of these pieces. You don't have to do it all in one stroke. You don't have to do it all in 10 strokes. Take your time, build up the details, build up the shapes of your mountain. See how the shadows and highlights give you suggestions and things to try. If there's something you really don't like, you can always undo and try something else. Now, the shape of your hull brush, once you've got that top, don't forget to extend it down in all directions a little bit. We don't want our mountain to only be one-sided. So really move it around. You can see how I have a big gap back here. So I'm going to add another little peak and pull it around. Just so these pieces blend together, I don't have too many overhangs. It's okay to have little cliffs and shelves and things, but we don't want to have great gaping holes in our mountainside, unless you're specifically trying to make caves. But that's a whole other story. So let me get rid of that extra piece. So here we have a snow cap for my mountain. Now I'm going to switch to some gray colors. Starting fairly pale, and I'm going to start having rock formations coming out of here. Cover up any sticky out bits with more sticky out bits. If you're worried about, you can see how it's a little glossy, it's a little shiny. If I want this to be flat rock, I'm actually going to switch to the matte hull. Now as I put in these rock pieces, there's none of that glossiness, there's none of that shininess. So it does feel a little bit more of a surface. The glossy, shiny surface is great for things like wet weather or rocks and ice, that type of thing. Since I'm doing a simple rocky mountaintop here, I've got enough snow at the cap, so now I'm going to bring out these bases a little bit. Don't get too hung up in doing it one direction as well. Otherwise, you'll have all of your mountains sort of leaning in the same direction. So I'm actually going to swing this around to the other side so I can bring it in a little bit of a different direction. There we go. So now you can see how my mountainside, because it's made up of all these different pieces, it's starting to feel rough. It's starting to feel more natural. Now I can look specifically for these types of gaps, these types of openings, and fill them in. Most mountains, not all mountains, but most of them get broader as they go down. They're conical. So I'm going to be bringing in, you notice my base is getting wider and wider as I'm getting more of these elements in place. I'm even going to switch to another shade of gray to get more of these types of elements. I'm even going to go to a different scale. So some of these rocks are going to have pieces at different sizes and different angles than the main ones. Let's get a little more piece in here. We'll get some pieces out like that. As you change your scale, it may give you different ideas and different perspectives on the pieces you've done. Feel free to go in with your eraser and remove pieces you decide you don't like and add in other pieces as you go. So here now you can see my mountain is starting to really pull back, really become its own piece in the landscape here. Get a couple more pieces behind because I don't know if my viewers are going to come around behind. So I want to make sure I've got it covered from all sides. Okay. Here is my mountainside. Not enough. I want to have trees and everything. So I'm actually going to select this and grab all of the pieces in my mountain here. So I can just raise the mountain and make it even bigger. There we go. So now when I'm standing here, we've got the mountain going in the background a little bit. So let's bring it in. Now I'm going to switch to a very gray-green. The closer you get to the center, the grayer your color becomes. So out at the edge, it's a vibrant green. In towards the center, it's more of a sage green. That's what I'm going to use to start bringing. That's still a little too pale. Let's go for a darker sage green. There we go. More in the same vein of the rocks themselves. So now I can start getting more mountain shape. But now instead of just the rocky part of the mountain, now we're starting to pull down where there's some green and some life. I'm still going to be very loose with my shapes. I still don't want it to feel too regular. This isn't a machined created object. This is a natural object. So little bits of randomness are going to come into it. Don't forget about changing your size and scale. I'm just going to be doing it quick here. I probably won't even do the back of it just so we can see what else is going here. There we go. I got a mountain in the way. Darker, but a little bit more vibrant green. Oops, a little too vibrant of a green. We want to make these adjustments fairly slow, oops, it's still a little too much. You can sort of color match by doing right next to it. Okay, that's a little closer. A little more vibrant, getting more plant life and life into our zones down here. You can see how not only do I pull forward, but I sometimes pull back and up to pull those hills up into the rest of the mountain. Find places where they're going to fit. If you want to, you can even go in and add rivers, that type of thing. Or maybe I'll grab the smoke and see if I can find my smoke. Add a few wispies of smoke around the top of the mountain here. Get some cloud effect in here. You'll notice I'm using black smoke, so I'm not going to get a lot of blinding white clouds immediately. But you can see that's a very smooth, soft effect because the smoke is starting off, the clouds are starting off very dark. That's starting to look mountain-like. And if I go full size, it's starting to feel a little more mountain-like as well. If you want to do details like trees and stuff like that, so I'm going to make my mountain really huge, I'm going to go back to a nice dark pine green, and I'm going to grab my spike. A little too big. Spike. One of the things we looked at in the making textures is now that I've got a little bit of a grove of forest here, I'm going to select these pine trees and duplicate. And we're going to make lots of little pine trees going in different directions. Up as they go, I'm just going to have the tips peeking out. So the trees are smaller and fewer far between, and then they're going to get bigger and more frequent as we get closer to the ground. There we go. So now I've got a whole bunch of trees to make a forest on this part of the mountain. There we go. As always, alternate your direction and your height just to give a little more variety in your pieces. So now we've got a forested foothill area. As a cheat, I'm even going to grab a whole big section of forest foothill, grab a whole bunch of these trees, so that I can just start making even more forest duplicates and really cover the bottom area over here with a dense forest. Little tiny forest up here, bigger, denser forest over here. Just so the tips and the trees up in there, just so there's a couple more trees happening. There we go. Now it's starting to feel like a landscape. If I notice parts that bother me, I can just go in and trim them out. Use your dropper tool to pick up the exact same hull brush. So now I can go in and start making repairs to these pieces I've been deleting. There we go. I don't like that big green panel, so I'm going to delete that one. Actually, I like that pretty well. Okay. So any little embellishments you feel like doing, I'm going to make a little tiny mountain stream coming down. Actually, it needs to be going up so that the waves are going in the right direction. Maybe get a little bit of the directional streamers. Make sort of a waterfall going over here. Get these little details in. And then let's grab, now I'm going to use a pale smoke to get a little steam and stuff, a little spray happening at my waterfall over here. So it's just a little detail that's off in the corner, but the more of those little details is really going to bring this to life. I could even use my selection tool to select a large part of the whole mountain. Look at this, I'm going to get all this stuff. It helps when you're really big, you can select a lot of things at once. But now I could actually make a mountain range. So let's get a couple more of these guys happening in the background. Maybe even overlap them a little bit so we can see how the mountain ranges. Let's see. And another one over here. So now our environment has a number of mountains in the background. And we've got a forested area on this one that we can play with. Oops, looks like part of my mountain got covered up. So let's go in and clean up now. Remove some of those extra pieces. Oh, I like that piece. I like that piece too. But what I can do is grab these two pieces and bring them back a little bit to get my forest back. There we go. Now we've got this mountain range, purple mountains in the background, and very detailed, beautiful mountains in the foreground. And if I go to normal human size, those mountains are huge. They feel weight, they feel size. I've even got the peaks in the background with clouds and snow blowing. Pretty straightforward. Most of this was done with a hull brush to make the shapes. You can always go in and recolor. So if I want to get more variety in my greens here, I'm going to get that green. But now I'm going to get a slightly different version of it and recolor just a few of these pieces in the slightly different green. So you can see how it adds a little more depth, a little more detail and texture. The more variety you can bring in, the more real, the more interesting this environment's going to become. I hope this is helpful. I hope this inspires you to try some new stuff out. If you've got some good things going, let us know. Link to it in the comments below. Put it up on Sketchfab and places like that so other people can see what you've got going. So I'm going to switch back to my normal tool here to thank you all for joining me today. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you know when new lessons come out. Also, feel free to ask questions. Let us know in the comments about the types of things you want to learn, and we'll try to do episodes bringing those into play. So have fun with Tilt Brush, everybody, and we'll see you next time.